Well, and let's just get this on the table. It doesn't matter where your husband is from, whether he's from your culture or a different culture. Men and women are different cultures.
That's
really.
True. That's true.
And so trying to understand a man from any culture can be a challenge. And
hello everyone, welcome back to the Fascinating Womanhood channel, where we talk about all things that have to do with femininity and building strong relationships. I am Cherry Lynn, and I'm so excited to be here with this very lovely and special group of ladies. First, starting with my mom, Dixie Andelin Forsyth. Hi.
Hello. Cherry's visiting.
Yeah, so we're here together, so we're kind of squishing in the camera for you guys today. So hope that works okay. And then we're also joined with my sister, Lisa Danya Malinia. And then we're also here with our cousin, Brenna Saunders. Hi.
So we are all family.
So we're talking about combining different cultures in our marriages and relationships. So we're just going to dive right in. Everyone here is married to someone from a different culture, which is really exciting. And we all have someone completely different that we're married to from a completely different culture from each other. So we're going to go around and everyone is going to say a little bit about their relationship and the cultural differences that they have. So Lisa, we're going to start with you.
Okay, so my husband is Iranian. And if anybody knows or watches the news, the relations between my country, United States, and Iran is not exactly ideal right now. So we're from opposing countries, and that itself has created some challenges. I was born in the U.S., and then we moved to Canada, to Dad's home, and then we moved back to the U.S. My husband and I are from really quite different cultures, but there are also a lot of similarities. And his culture is something that I was actually always interested in, and from the time I was a little girl. So it was sort of interesting that when we met, I thought, oh, this is great because he's from Persia, so.
Okay, so Brenna.
Yeah, so my husband is from South Korea. He calls himself Generation 1.5. His parents are first generation. They're immigrants from South Korea to the United States, which, by the way, is where I'm from. And, he lived part of his life in Hong Kong, part of his life in South Korea, and part of his life in the United States. So luckily for us, we don't have much of a language barrier, but there is, definite cultural differences. And we actually met in South Korea and we got married there, and we lived in South Korea for a little while before coming back to the United States. So that was a really awesome insight for me to live in that culture where my husband is from.
And you learned a little bit of the language too, didn't you?
Yeah, enough to kind of get around.
My husband Bob is from Canada, which to me doesn't make him terribly foreign because we both spoke English growing up.
Barely counts.
Barely counts. I was born in the United States, in Idaho, and raised in California. And he was born in Canada, lived a little while in the United States, but most of the time in Canada.
So my husband, he is Hispanic, so he was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and he and I met. I was born in Missouri in the U.S., and we met when he had already come here. So he actually learned English when he was 10, 12. So he has a small accent, just enough.
Imperceptible. It's very little.
yeah, but he speaks still, fluent Spanish, and all of his family speaks Spanish, and it's all Spanish. So we met in college here when he had lived here for, I think he was 19 when we met, so he had lived here for almost a decade. So, and we have 2 kids, so that's a little bit of a different dynamic that I can speak more to later about how it feels when you
okay.
when you kids.
I feel like all 4 of us have very different situations. So, there are a lot of ladies in different situations, and I'm hoping we can cover quite a few people's scenarios here. Cherry, you said you have young children. Mom raised 7, and she's an empty nester. And then Brenna and I, neither of us have children. So in my case, my husband has never been to the United States. We live in Australia.
Very different.
So,
That's a good point.
So we live in a totally foreign country to both of us. So
and have no family members on either side of your family.
No family. We're alone here. So hopefully we can cover the ladies that are in some country that's not theirs.
I think you bring up a really good point, and I'm glad you said that. That the reason why we wanted to do this is we have so many questions about culture from a lot of the ladies that we talk to.
Mm-hmm.
They say, you know, whether it's religion, whether it's how you're raising your kids, whether it's like what Mom was just talking about with problems, like legal problems,
or daily things like food.
There's we just wanted to address a lot of that. So hopefully we can all just kind of dive in. We're going to do a little bit of a Q&A kind of thing. So we're going to start with the first question is, when did cultural differences first sink into your relationship?
Let's say day one. Well, and let's just get this on the table. It doesn't matter where your husband is from, whether he's from your culture or a different culture. Men and women are different cultures.
That's
really.
True. That's true.
And so trying to understand a man from any culture can be a challenge. And so, you know, we say, oh, he's foreign, but we have a lot of women that are married within their own culture and say, I don't understand my husband at all.
True.
So maybe we have an extra layer of that. One of the things when we met was that he asked me my age right off the bat.
Yeah.
Now, in the U.S. and a lot of Western culture, I'm not sure about Europe, but he had lived in Korea and I was living there at the time. And so he'd been used to both Korean culture and Iranian culture. He said it's completely okay to ask people's age. I said, no, you can't ask me that right now. So I thought, oh, he's being one of those guys that wants to check my age because see if I'm, you know, eligible. And that wasn't the case. That was just one of those things that you're taught to ask people as a polite thing.
Didn't he ask you?
Yet, not long after he asked my weight.
Mistake number 2.
No.
Awkward.
The problem was in my head, I thought, oh, he is trying to do something that he shouldn't do. That was a cultural thing because I was taking it from an American perspective and saying, you're not allowed to do that. And in his case, and I'm sure it sank into him as well, this girl is flipping out over nothing, you know? So we had, we both laugh about it now, but we just didn't understand where each other was coming from.
Yeah. So Brenna, when did you experience it?
I don't have any memory of any first time to speak of. My situation was interesting in that I first saw Yun, who's my husband, in a Korean context. We were in a church that was in Korea and everybody spoke Korean, and we were in Sunday school and everybody, including him, was speaking Korean, and I just figured he was just a native Korean guy, and he was assigned to be my translator. So as soon as I heard him start speaking English, it blew my mind, and I thought, okay, this is a person that before that, I already thought he was cute and stuff. So as soon as I saw he spoke English fluently, I thought, oh, maybe there's actually a chance for me to get to know this person. And so, luckily we had a lot in common because there was not a language barrier between us. But obviously little subtle things, would rear their heads now and then. And one of my funniest memories of this is when he was visiting my family. I think it was the first time he met them back in the States, and we went to get candy. I think all of us here know about T's Candy, right?
Yes.
We go to get some
chocolates or Western thing.
For anyone who doesn't know, very famous chocolates from California. And so we go to this candy store and we go, okay, let's get some candy for our family, because I think it was like holiday season. And so I get like a pound of candy and I pick out a bunch of stuff for, everybody who's going to have it, and try to pick out something everybody's going to like. And after we get that candy, I go, okay, time to get our candy for ourselves or like for me or whatever. And he just looked at me and he said, what do you mean? Like, I thought we were going to share it. And I said, well, yeah, we're sharing the one that we got for everybody explicitly for that reason. And then I'm getting my own for myself. And it just kind of blew his mind. He's like, wow, I just grew up in a culture where like you share everything. And he wasn't acting like I was being selfish. It just was something that never had crossed his mind, and something that I never would have thought of either.
Huh.
And it was just an interesting moment of, oh, these things that we take for granted, maybe not everybody thinks that way. So it wasn't a point of conflict, but it was an opportunity to get that insight of, okay, there's, other perspectives out there besides mine.
So interesting. I love that story.
So what did you notice?
So there's two things that stick out to me that are really strong, and I can't decide which one. But the first time was a holiday. I was invited to his parents' house for Thanksgiving, and he didn't say anything about the food. I just asked if I could bring something, and he said no. And then we got to his mom's house, and I was like, "Where's the turkey? What are we having?" And she was serving soup, and it was a very healthy, wonderful soup. It was really, really good, but it was, like beans and stuff. It was like, oh. And it smelled wonderful, but I was just like, wow, I'm in a different place. Like, this is very different.
No
I've never had Thanksgiving with soup, and we had rolls. It was very light, and vegetables. We had it very, very light, because that's what they did. They did that every Thanksgiving. And now I think over time they've started to kind of get into turkey and stuff. But I just felt like that moment was like, wow, I forgot that I really didn't realize that they celebrate things differently.
I'm the one who's married to the mostly same culture, but the thing I noticed first is that I grew up in a family that was very, shall we say, health conscious, health nut. My husband did not. His mom said, "Do you want a banana split for breakfast?" And so she did. She said it has energy no matter when you have it. It was completely different from the way I grew up. So that was, and that was not hard to adjust to.
Yeah. Yours was easy. Okay, so describe your relationship with your in-laws and or husband's family. What challenges have you overcome?
I am the luckiest girl in the world. I have the best in-laws. His family, I've never met personally in the flesh any of his family, because I cannot get a visa to visit his family. With the situation right now, they can't really leave. So it's impossible. But he has a large family. There were 9 children in his family. His father's passed away, and he has the dearest, sweetest mom. And we video chat. She accepted me right off. And I'm so lucky about that. I know that doesn't happen for everybody. She has been, I feel like, if something ever happened, she would take my side because she just really loves me. She can't be here physically, but I feel like she takes care of me. She's just very loving and always says really sweet things. And he has brothers. I've met his brothers. We video chat. I feel like I know his nieces and nephews, and thank goodness we live in the age of video chat so that we can do that. So in my case, I have an almost ideal situation with my husband's family. The only thing that's not ideal is that we can't be together. And that's the thing that I really wish.
How about you, Brenna?
Yeah, so I have wonderful in-laws. I mean, my experience, I think there's some overlap with Lisa. I'm lucky. South Korean mothers-in-law have a reputation that precedes them. You might have heard the expression of tiger mom. In some of those East Asian cultures, they call tiger moms these kind of overachieving moms, and mothers-in-law who expect a lot. And I was very lucky, and I do not have that situation. But so I wouldn't say that there's been any negative things, but it's definitely still been an experience to learn about just different expectations. Again, this is not a good or bad thing. It's just a different thing. For example, when I first met Yun's parents, this is kind of funny to me. It was my first time to meet them. Yun and I were serious about dating, but I'm kind of a modern woman, and I'm like, I can't marry you until I meet your parents. I just can't, I need to meet them before we can even say we're thinking about getting married. We meet his parents. They're wonderful. And then they sit us down at the dining table, and they literally elbows propped up practically, and they're like, so when you guys can get married? It blew my mind, because my family, and I'm grateful that you guys raised this point earlier, that there's cultures and subcultures that vary even within your own umbrella culture. For us, as the United States. But I grew up in a family that is very private, very personal. You don't share stuff, and you unless you know people well, and you also don't ask questions unless you know people. It's just not rude. It's just not polite to do that. And so I immediately knew that they were coming from a good place. It wasn't rude. It was just different. And I wasn't prepared for that, because again, this goes back to taking for granted the way you think, like, oh, what do you say? I wasn't expecting someone would ask me that. And it was kind of cute, because my future, at that point, my future mother-in-law took me aside, and she's like, I'm so grateful you met my son, and I was hoping he'd find someone finally, she's thanking me already. You haven't even agreed to get married.
Finally.
like finally, like he was some kind of, I'm like, he's an awesome person. It was great. And it worked out great. But so I would just say as advice, because I know that there's people hopefully who are going to be listening who want advice on this or insight. And I would just say, just get to know what the expectation is, and just be a little flexible, be a little open-minded. Don't get offended easily if it's different from what you think. Just try to put yourself in their shoes and think, okay, why are they saying this? Try to have a sense of humor about it too. That really helps.
For me, it's been hills and valleys, and I think one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because it's one of the most asked about questions, topics, is my mother-in-law or my in-laws or my husband's brother. It always becomes, the boundaries get tricky with family. And the one thing that I feel like has been tricky with the cultural part with my husband is that kind of what you talked about a little bit, Brenna, just family is different. Like the way you interpret family is just very, very different how he grew up. And everything from the way the mother and the father's role is down to, what you eat. And so I think specifically with her, she's a very strong woman, very, very strong woman. She had to raise him solo for a long time because his father passed away when he was young. And so she's kind of done it all and done it really well. So she's really strong, and she's not, the housewife at home that's just, tending to the kids. She's kind of been a working mom and done everything. So I think I actually really, right off the bat, admired that about her a lot and got along really great in the beginning. And as far as challenges that we've overcome, once we had children, that's when I started to really notice some of the challenges that we had as far as how to raise, even how to hold a baby. It's like, oh, you don't hold them like that. You hold them like this. Like those things were really tough for me because I didn't know what the intentions were. And I think over time, as Brenna said, I have learned to be more flexible, and I've had to learn, this is how she is, and this is where acceptance kind of comes in. I've had to really accept, well, she just wants to help, and this is what her contribution as a grandmother.
That's why we say accepting not just your husband first, but you try to accept all people at face value.
And it's tough. It sounds easy. It sounds easy when we say it, but it's incredibly hard. And it's a journey. It's probably a lifelong journey to accept people, especially when it comes to your kids. But the more I have accepted it, the better everything's been. So
I dearly love my in-laws. They both passed away. But when I first married Bob, not the father-in-law, my mother-in-law, kind of had ideas. She was a little uncomfortable with him marrying a girl from Southern California. She thought that her son, she wanted him to marry a local farm girl.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I didn't fit that. Not only that, my mother wrote the original Fascinating Womanhood, and my mother-in-law knew who she was. She was well known enough, and so she was a little bit uncomfortable. But over time, it was a little scary at first because I knew, that she was real sweet, but I knew what she really wanted.
But you overcame a lot of that.
Oh yeah. But at first, I was only 19. I was only 19 when I got married, and so anyway.
Yeah. So biggest challenge in general.
Aside from, I think a huge challenge is simply not being able to visit each other's countries. That's been really difficult. I don't know if this is just we don't talk about this much in Fascinating Womanhood, but maybe this is especially important to females, I'm not sure, to the feeling of being understood as who you are. And a lot of that can be, if you're from the same culture, you can understand more quickly. We have almost a social shorthand that we use when we talk to people. And if you're from a different culture, you lose that shorthand, and it takes a lot more explaining to, and because we are quite different culturally, being able to get my idea across about my intentions, and, because there's a bit of a language barrier for me, getting across what I mean when I say something, or emotionally, where I'm coming from. If these are really deep feelings, the feelings of really somebody really understanding who you are. And part of understanding who someone is really understanding their culture. If your husband or your boyfriend or anybody that you know is from your culture, you can kind of get there a little more quickly. And I've noticed that the process is a little bit slower when you're not from the same culture.
Very good point. Brenna?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, the one thing I would say is a challenge is that when I gather with my in-laws, they speak amazing English, so there's no problem with me speaking to them. But my husband doesn't talk to them in English. He wants to talk to them in Korean. So there's kind of multiple conversations happening at the table. And I grew up in a family where you don't do that. It's one conversation, you know, everybody's part of it, kind of. Otherwise, you break up into multiple conversations. So and I don't know how much of this might be just my husband's way of doing things, but I do think a big part of it is the language thing. Because even though my husband speaks, it's like your situation, Sherry. He's perfectly bilingual and has very little accent. He just, in his case, he feels strange talking to his parents in English, and he just won't do it. So
it would be weird.
I get it. I get that. So, I mean, through context, a lot of times I can tell what he's saying to them. He'll stop and he'll translate for me in short, quickly, and his parents will do that too. But then a lot of times what happens is his parents talk to me in English, and then my husband just kind of tunes out of the conversation. So it's a little eccentric. Again, I'm someone who just likes to have one big conversation with everybody, so everybody contributes. I just think that that's really fun, but it's a little eccentric for me. But I accept it. And I look at it as, and this is something I think applies to so many things when it's a challenge, is how can you take some ownership and what can you do about it? So for me, that would be continuing to just try to learn the language more, or at least retain what I know about the language so I can follow along and feel like I'm part of it more.
That's good. Okay, yeah. Sherry.
I agree with all the communication things that you guys are talking about. I've struggled with communication. I completely agree with those things. But I think for me, the biggest one has been parenting. And this is something that no one can really prepare you for. You can't really go on a date with someone and get really nitty gritty about like how they want to raise kids. I mean, you can get a little bit, but you really discover a lot about the other person.
That's true. Whether you may be in the same culture and have that problem.
Yeah,
too.
That's true. It's hard whether you're different cultures or not. But I think specifically with me and cultural things has been how he views family, how his family views family time. And I could get really specific. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get too serious, but I think I'll use a humorous one to kind of keep it light. Perfect example. My husband gets really upset at the table, at the dinner table when my son burps. Even if it's quiet, it's very serious. It's almost like time out serious. And I don't know that that's necessarily all Mexicans. I don't know that that's necessarily their culture, but it's just a small example. It's just a small example of some of the things that I experienced. So I'll just use that. When I grew up, our brothers, they would just do that. Sometimes they'd have like burping contests or whatever, and they were just kids, and they would just do that stuff. And I just don't think as much about it. It doesn't really. I mean, I don't think it's polite, but I just don't. It's not that offensive to me. But it's to the point where he almost has to leave the room sometimes because it's so rude. And it's family time. Dinner time is family time. And I've had to really learn. I've never really thought that way about dinner. I mean, I love family dinners, but I've never thought about it as this precious time. And as I've learned, as I've gotten to know him more, I've realized, wow, like his family dinner time was really important to him as a kid. And family dinners is when he saw his extended family. And as I've learned about it, I've started to learn how to be more flexible and respect it. So parenting in general, it's just, you have to learn these things. You have to figure them out with experience.
My kids are grown, and Bob and I have been married over 50 years, so we've worked out a lot of this stuff. But I would have to say with Sherry, parenting styles, no matter what country you're from, or if you're from the same country, you come from a different family and you do things differently. And so it's always a blending. And the principles of Fascinating Womanhood really helped me with that because of accepting someone at face value, learning to understand men, and learning how to talk to them.
Yeah, when you have kids that you kind of feel like a mama bear around, and you feel like, it's your love for them, and then it's your husband's love. It's like, it's this big, it's really hard. So what are some positive advantages that you have felt been a result of your cultural relationship?
I feel like there's so many positives. For me, it's like what Brenna said. There's the adventure aspect. I love learning about his country, his culture. I feel like I won the jackpot with his culture because it has got a rich history, and the language is beautiful. And, I love listening to him speak his language. I love learning about his family's culture and his country's culture. I love learning about the monarchs in the country. I'm trying to learn some Persian words. For me, it's quite difficult, but just having that exposure to this different culture is really, for me, very exciting. I've been thinking about this a lot. When you marry somebody from a different culture, you have so many more, you could say, years of learning about them. I guess it takes longer to learn about them because, at least in my case, it's slower to get his background and to understand where he's coming from. And so we've got years and years of discovery. I've seen couples that marry in the United States to each other. We have a joke, we say they're like an old married couple. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're like that in their 20s because they just get each other right off the bat. And that's awesome. It's wonderful. But you can say something for the other end of that, and where there's just the mystery, and there's that the fun of discovering all these things about someone that are surprising because you just could never imagine. There are things I learn about my husband that I just would never imagine. Things that happened when he was a kid and the way society was are fascinating. It's fun.
How about you, Brenna?
I have to echo a lot of what Lisa said, and I think she said it very well about the differences being, exciting and broadening your life experience and your lived experience. Something I would just add is that you might be surprised that you'll find, and this is my case, that you have something, in fact, multiple things in common with your spouse that you wouldn't even have necessarily with someone from the same culture. That was very interesting to me to find out with Yun. Since we kind of have this theme of light and fluffy going, I'll just kind of keep to that. But one example is that, in American culture, I think all of us can agree there's this notion that men, love meat and eat lots of meat. But for women, it's very feminine, or it's just more of a woman thing to eat more healthy food. And that's some kind of ongoing conflict. I mean, this is just kind of what I've seen, and superficially in our culture, there's loads of exceptions. My husband is from a culture where you don't eat a lot of meat and you eat a lot of vegetables, and I care about health and he does too, and we eat lots of awesome stuff. Whereas a lot of guys I've met, including guys I've dated from my own culture, feel like you need to eat, lots of meat with everything. That is just one that's kind of almost a superficial example, but there's been many other things like that I've found in my relationship with my husband, where it's like, wow, we have these things in common. This is so interesting. How did this happen? Is it in spite of the cultural differences? And sometimes I think it's almost like the cultural differences help with that. The other thing is the world is getting smaller all the time, and technology really helps to bridge these gaps. People are having common experiences all over the world thanks to technology and travel. So I think it's easier and easier than ever to meet and date and marry someone from another culture. I think you need to be very educated about how you do it, but I think that the world is changing a lot, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
I agree with everything you guys said. I think the only thing I would add to it for me personally is the inclusive environment and the diverse environment that we can have for our kids. I really, really love that. It's important to us that our kids go to a school with diversity. It's important that our kids experience other cultures because we are different cultures. And so we kind of love that spirit of learning about other cultures, and very similar to what you guys are saying, but carrying it into parenting, I think is really, really wonderful. And I agree with what you said too, Lisa, about it. I love learning about it. I love the trips that we've taken to his home and stuff, and being able to learn about other countries to me is such a treat. And when we visit, it's almost like we're going to another home because he can speak the language. And it's like, wow, this is great. You can just speak the language. So yeah, those are kind of my two things.
Well, and what you mentioned, you actually also kind of have built-in international travel. If you like to travel, you suddenly get a few more perks that way.
Yeah, and my kids can kind of get a little bit of Spanish. I'm not going to lie, they're not great, but they're getting a little bit of Spanish here and there, and I love that. I think it's great. They can talk to their grandparents in Spanish. It's great.
I don't really think of going to Canada as traveling foreign. It feels like the United States, except the money looks different. And French it's a dual language thing, but where Bob is from, it's English. So, but fortunately, we both love to travel.
Okay, so advice And if you were to give one piece of advice to a woman that's preparing themselves for a cultural marriage, what do you have?
Treasure hunt. I think we've talked about this a little bit in some of the videos where we talk about getting upstairs. It can be stressful to have misunderstandings with your man about culture or something like that. It's really important to get in the mindset of treasure hunting, and that means looking for all the positive things in your relationship rather than dwelling on the things that are difficult. And if you haven't read Fascinating Womanhood for the Timeless Woman, definitely for women that are in a multicultural, intercultural marriage, read the section on understanding men and on the brain, because that is, I think it's essential. I mean, it's essential for every marriage, but especially essential in a case where there could be constant misunderstandings.
No matter the culture, that's why I tried to put timeless principles in here. No matter what culture, religion, or anything that your husband or boyfriend comes from, there are certain things that are the same because they're men who are women, and some things are universal, even though our cultures are different.
Mm-hmm.
Practice acceptance, because that is a huge deal when you're from a different background. And always make sure he knows that he's number one, because it's very easy if you say that you don't celebrate the same holidays the same way. Like Christmas. Christmas is a big deal to me, and my husband grew up in a country where they don't really do Christmas so much. If you start to feel sorry for yourself at Christmas time because, we don't have the stockings by the fire and all these traditions and stuff, you've got to make sure that Christmas is not number one, that your husband is number one. Whatever matter comes up, or if it's issues with your in-laws or issues with your children, always make sure that he is number one, top priority in your heart, and make sure that he knows it.
Brenna?
My advice to someone who's considering marrying a person from another culture is to learn about their culture and respect their culture. If you can't do that, it might be a big obstacle for you. I'm sure that you would want them to respect and understand yours, so do what you can. I understand that most people probably meet their future spouse in a country outside of where that person is from, but if you have the chance to visit their country, do it. In my case, I lived in the country where my husband is from, and that has made a huge difference. I mean, here's just one more superficial example, but in South Korea, they just have a very different sense of humor there, and they have these really goofy TV shows. And my husband sometimes watches these TV shows now that were in the States. And I think if I had never lived in Korea and I saw that, I'd be like, that's just so dumb, and I can't even understand that. It would just be one more little barrier. Having lived in Korea, it's like, I know exactly what these shows are. Like, I've seen them. I know what they are. I still don't watch them, but I know what they are. It's not foreign to me. The more you familiarize with yourself with that culture, the less the culture seems like this big alien thing. It's like, I'm comfortable with it, and you don't have to like everything about it, but the food, if you can learn to know the food and eat it or cook it, even better. You don't have to learn the language all the way, but if you can just learn some phrases that are popular, special little terms of endearment in that language you can use with your spouse or your boyfriend, I think that makes a huge difference. And then one other thing I would just add is meet your future in-laws. If you haven't gotten married yet, meet them, because I was lucky and my experience worked out smoothly, but even so, I'm glad I met them before we married. I know a lot of people, this is a huge problem potentially, because family expectations can be so rigid and different depending on the culture. So try to meet the in-laws, know what the expectation is going to be, and have that conversation with your husband as transparent as you can. It may sound like a fairy tale to marry someone from this totally different culture, and it can be in some aspects, but there is still a person who's flawed, and so are you, and you're living together and seeing the best and worst of each other. So make sure you know what you're in for, just like you would with anybody, but just do your due diligence. But be open to it, because there are wonderful people from all over the world. Don't close yourself off to someone just because they're from a different country or place. They might be just as compatible for you, if not more. So
everybody here, we're fortunate that we married people who were not in-laws, were not prejudiced against you because you were from a different country.
Sure.
And that sometimes happens. If the
son
marries a daughter of somebody who is a completely different culture and their parents do not approve marrying outside their culture, that can be its own challenge. Understanding and accepting people at face value is going to be the best thing to help you
Yeah, I think everything has been covered. You guys basically said everything. The only thing I just add to that is just be an incredible listener. Listen, sometimes I've listened to things that I haven't really listened to, and I've had to ask stories over and over again from him because I didn't really listen to it very closely the first time, and I didn't ask the right questions, and I regret that. I wish when we were first dating, or I wish when we were first married, I had really listened to that story you told me about when you were younger. It would have helped me understand him better, and I've had to learn that the hard way. So that would be the only other little 2 cents that I would have, is just to really, everyone should be listening to their spouse, but I think specifically when you have someone with a different language and a different culture, a different place they were raised, you really need to do, like Lisa said, a lot of kind of treasure hunting, but also just general hunting for how you were raised. And Brenna said what your culture was like, go visit. I think that's all very, very good advice.
And if you marry someone from the same country, say he lives from your same neighborhood, he's raised in a totally different family, visit his relatives and get to know his family and learn about their traditions and their ways of doing things and their recipes, their cooking.
Yeah, the cooking's a good one.
Because the kind of things that he likes, his comfort food, learn to do it. I know for Lisa, you said that your husband wasn't raised with so much dairy like we eat here.
Yeah.
The cheese and stuff that we use is something very foreign to him. So
I would say try to just be open.
Yeah.
Be open to other, like Sherry, you said you had soup for Thanksgiving, and that might be some huge disappointment to girls, but just be open to it and enjoy it and just say, this is different, but it's good. That is related to treasure hunting.
Because ultimately Thanksgiving is about being with loved ones.
Yeah.
And that's the same.
Okay, well, this has been a really, really fun conversation. Thank you all so much for being here with us and talking about this today. And if there's anyone watching that has any questions for us, please drop them down below. I'm sure you have a ton of questions if you are someone out there that is in a situation like we've been in and you want to ask a specific question of us. We would love to hear from you. Attached to the video, we will also have a link to purchase Dixie's book, along with her workbook and all of the places that you can find us on social media. And we're here every week, so don't forget to check back with us next time. Bye.
Bye.